If you're choosing a high-end Android phone in late 2024, chances are these two are going to be right at the top of your list. Google's new Pixel 9 Pro XL is the best Pixel ever, having fixed the series' long-standing battery life issues while doubling down on excellent camera features and introducing a new Gemini AI trickery. And Samsung's S24 Ultra is an absolute unit of a phone that takes a very different approach, relying on raw technical horsepower inside a monolithic design outfitted with the S Pen. Both of these are fantastic buys, but we have to pick one overall winner. So let's get stuck in. I'm Alex Dobie, this is XDA. Once again, it's time to pit the Pixel against the Galaxy. Right out of the gate, these are two big, hefty smartphones, but the minutiae, the minor details of Samsung's design makes its phone feel considerably chunkier than Google's. I already touched on it in the intro, but it's worth stating just how different these designs actually are. The S24 Ultra riffs on the old Galaxy Note design language, being flat on almost every surface, save for the side rails, which are slightly rounded in a rare concession to the human hand. By comparison, Google's phone doesn't feel quite as much like it was designed for the cold metal clutches of a robot with its rounded iPhone-style corners, though admittedly it's still an aggressively flat phone, and fairly thick too, being just 1/10 of a millimeter slimmer than the Galaxy. You'll end up skating into the danger zone in terms of drops and fumbles whichever one of these you use, as one-handed use can be tricky, but Google's definitely pulls ahead just through its lack of pointy edges that dig into your delicate nerdy palms. I guess I should also point out that the S24 Ultra has a titanium plated frame here, which honestly I think is 100% about bragging rights and keeping up with the iPhone on paper, as opposed to any real benefit for users. My S24 Ultra here has held up just fine, but I've definitely seen others pick up some knocks and scrapes. I guess time will tell whether it's any better in practice than the Pixel's aluminium. Starting prices for the Galaxy S24 Ultra hover around $100 more than the Pixel 9 Pro XL, and to justify that extra cost, Samsung's packed in its share of extra high-end tech specs. It's running Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 chip, the leading-edge Android SoC for at least the next few months at the time we're making this video. It's stupendously quick, and you'd seriously have to try really hard to not get excellent performance and battery life out of a modern Snapdragon phone like this. Google's Tensor G4 boasts onboard AI hardware specifically designed to power its loadout of AI features, and Google's also gone to war on the battery drain that's dogged earlier Tensor processors, in part thanks to a new efficient Samsung 5G modem in this model. But the Pixel still gets creamed by the S24 or any Snap 8 Gen 3 phone in synthetic benchmarks and heavy gaming. But then if you're buying a phone for gaming, chances are you already know the Pixel isn't for you, and if you're buying a phone to run benchmarks all day, then
stop it. Get some help.
Google's newfound power efficiency means you've got two phones here that sip power and will easily last you into a second day if you use your phones the way I do mine. The days of Pixel battery anxiety are over, and Samsung's Snapdragon-based Ultra phones have had great battery life themselves for the past couple of generations anyway. Charging speeds are near enough too. On paper you're looking at 37 watts for the Pixel versus 45 for the Galaxy, but the difference in overall charging speeds isn't that great. You're looking at an extra 15 minutes to refill from dead on the Google phone. Meanwhile, if you're plugging in from the danger zone, both phones will easily get you past the 50% mark in under 30 minutes. And biometrics are equally excellent too, now that Google uses the same fingerprint technology as Samsung in the form of Qualcomm's 3D Sonic Gen 2 sensor. Crucially though, Samsung starts you off with 256 gigs of base storage, which is the correct amount for an expensive phone in 2024. Google's still cheaping out and sticking with 128, which is just insultingly low in an $1,100 handset. RAM-wise, the Pixel does have an advantage on paper with its 16 gigabytes, however 3 gigs of that is reserved for its AI models, so in practice you've got a very similar amount of RAM on both phones for other apps. The biggest hardware difference though, after you get over the actual design deltas, is the display. Now, both screens are fantastic, no complaints, easily top tier, but Samsung's Corning Gorilla Armor panel with its inky blacks and space age reflection cancelling capabilities pushes ahead of the Pixel's screen, even though Google actually packs a higher peak brightness level on paper. Samsung's screen is easier to view in bright daylight and when wearing sunglasses, and the unique glass behind it is still to be found in exactly 0 other phones beside the S24 Ultra. And I'd be remiss in not mentioning the S Pen, Samsung's long-standing stylus that lives inside a silo in the phone. If you're considering an S24 Ultra, you probably already know whether the pen is a big deal for you personally. I don't use it all that often. When I do, it's usually when navigating larger, more complex web pages, or occasionally as a camera remote. It's fine, it is what it is, it's great for drawing if that's your thing, but I don't particularly miss it when I change to the Pixel. Both devices are running Android 14 out of the box at the time when making this video, with updates to Android 15 arriving imminently towards the end of the year. Kind of a novelty to have new Pixels before a new version of Android, but hey, it puts these two phones on a more even footing. Aside from the obvious design and animation choices in how One UI and the Pixel UI look and feel, there are plenty of software differences to dig into. Google's is cleaner and a little simpler, more focused. Samsung is keen to give you buttons to press, shiny things to see, and various options to change. There's more to tinker with on the Galaxy S24 Ultra, as exemplified by the many Samsung ecosystem apps that are bundled, and powerful toys like Good Lock, which is the Swiss Army knife of smartphone tweaking. Think of it as like a deep settings versus your regular settings app. One unique strength of Samsung is its DeX desktop mode, which Google has yet to match in the Pixel series, despite years of rumors and evidence of the company working on its own phone-based desktop capabilities behind the scenes. I don't know how many people are regularly relying on DeX as a day-to-day desktop solution, but if you needed to use this as a basic computer for things like browsing and writing, you absolutely could. On the Pixel side, it's more about ambient computing, the Pixel doing useful things for you in the background, along with deep integration, of course, with Google services, and new in the Pixel 9 series, its latest AI endeavors led by Google Gemini. The new software features most worth talking about on the Pixel all boil down to various flavors of AI. Google Gemini replaces the Google Assistant out of the box, and you've got Gemini Live for live conversations running locally on the device, whereas on other phones like the S24 Ultra, which install Gemini from the Play Store, it's running in the cloud. Google's excellent AI photo editing features have finally caught up with last year's hype with the addition of Zoom Enhance to add AI-inspired details, and important information can be saved from your phone calls by linking into the Recorder app to summarize them. That's in addition to helpful features of a less AI-ish nature, like Hold for Me to screen your calls and Direct My Call to navigate cumbersome call center menus for you. There's plenty of stuff like this that Google's been slowly, steadily adding since the earliest Pixels. There are other Pixel AI features that kind of seem like solutions in search of a problem though. The Pixel Screenshot features is one such example. You need to group your screenshots into stacks for best results, then you can have Google's AI answer questions on the data in them. I haven't found it to be particularly useful, and other reviewers have found issues with the accuracy of what the AI spits out in some instances. And it's a similar situation with Pixel Studio, which is one of the many image generation apps you can coax into generating cutesy or perhaps not so cutesy AI generated slop. Every big phone brand is pushing features like this at the moment, and I don't think things like this are going to age particularly well. The Galaxy AI side of things is also kind of a mixed bag. I love some of the AI photo tricks Samsung has brought to its latest phones, like intelligent object moving, reframing, and auto slow-mo. Samsung's translation features too have been improving over the past few months, and the upcoming One UI 7 update should bring the S24 Ultra in line with Samsung's foldables, with support for more third-party calling apps in AI translation. Personally, I prefer the Google approach to smartphone software. I'm not using my phone as a desktop replacement, and I'm also not customizing it so much that add-ons like Good Lock are a necessity. I appreciate the more balanced UI and feature set of the Pixel, though as a longtime tech nerd, I can also definitely appreciate the more feature-rich loadout that you get with Samsung. The hardware of the S24 Ultra and Pixel 9 Pro's camera systems is more alike than ever this generation. The primary in both is a 1 over 1.3-inch sensor, the main telephoto is a 5x periscope shooter, and neither is likely to disappoint you in terms of photo, video, low light, portraits, or any of the usual stuff you're likely to be shooting with a phone camera, even if you're planning on using those photos or videos in a more professional setting. But there are still some differences to be seen in how these devices process photos, as well as the software feature set on offer. So let's jump in, starting with that primary, where you've got a 200 megapixel shooter on the Samsung side squaring off against Google's 50 megapixel unit. Different resolution obviously, but same physical size. And typically with these two main cameras, the differences are quite minor things like color balance, with Samsung favoring slightly cooler hues and brightness, with the S24 occasionally brightening its images a bit more than the Pixel. Honestly, I'm perfectly happy with the output from either of these main cameras. We're past the days when Samsung would aggressively oversaturate its photos. Vibrance is basically the same from both of these two cameras. In overcast and some indoor situations, the Pixel does like to raise its shadows just a little bit more, giving the Galaxy a bit more of a contrasty look by comparison, and there's perhaps a tiny bit of extra sharpening going on in some of the Samsung shots, but in daylight, even with some movement from subjects, it's a very close match between the S24 Ultra and Pixel 9 Pro XL. You really need to go nitpicking and pixel peeping to see any real difference. On the ultra-wide side, both are working with the same sensor side once again at 1 over 2.55 inches, but the Pixel easily boasts a wider field of view, as is plain to see in every one of our sample shots here. As I've said before, the wider the ultra-wide on a phone, the better, and the more fun to use, and as such you'll get much more dramatic looking shots and just more options generally with the Pixel when shooting ultra-wide pictures. Otherwise, the only real difference you'll see here are very minor color and brightness characteristics that we already noted with the main camera. Either way, both are high quality ultra-wides and don't exhibit any of the telltale noise or artifacting around the edge of the frame that you see from some cheaper ultra-wide cameras. Selfie-wise, both are excellent performers even in lower light. The biggest difference you'll notice here is once again just a much wider field of view for your front-facing pictures than you would get from the Galaxy camera. Both wide and ultra-wide are very strong performers in darker conditions too, with night sight activated automatically on the Google side, and Samsung with its own dedicated night mode that works in a similar way. Google does a slightly better job at cleaning up very incandescently lit scenes, for example under streetlights here, but there's really very little to complain about on either front. Again, very similar hardware and mature software processing yields similar results. Telephoto is where the rubber hits the road though. Samsung has an extra 3x shooter sitting between its 1x primary and 5x super telephoto, whereas Google doesn't. And honestly, in years past, I could kind of see the appeal of this 3x camera, especially when Samsung's only other telephoto was a 10x. But these days, the difference in shots between Samsung's 3x with its low 10 megapixel resolution and small sensor size and Google's upscaled crop from its main camera just doesn't seem to justify Samsung keeping around that smaller telephoto camera. A digital crop from your main sensor is most of the time going to be more than good enough. The 5x comparison is a bit more interesting. You've got some minor white balance differences and exposure differences as we talked about before. This time I found at 5x the Pixel camera was more aggressive about pushing up the overall brightness and especially pulling out a bit more detail from the shadows. Daylight performance is a lot more situational though. Samsung is a little more sensitive to motion than Google, I found, with the Galaxy camera more likely to mush up a 5x shot slightly with a little bit of hand motion, whereas the Pixel did a better job at compensating for that movement. At higher zoom levels of 10x or above, I saw less noise in pictures from the Pixel, though Google's telephoto did also produce some noticeable HDR haloing in places that weren't evident from the S24 Ultra. In low light, the tables were turned slightly though, and while both cameras did an admirable job shooting telephoto in darker conditions, I found myself preferring the sharper output of the Galaxy S24 Ultra, the advantage there possibly coming from the slightly larger sensor size or higher resolution used by Samsung. Of course, both phones come with excellent software features you can use to clean up a slightly softer looking shot like this, with Google's Zoom Enhance being a real game changer with the amount of simulated detail it can return to images like this, even though the nature of the way this feature works means that's not necessarily detail that was ever there to begin with. In video mode, I felt like Samsung was probably the slightly more consistent performer when you're shooting directly out of the camera in the standard 4K 30 mode. I noticed less varied colors when switching between lenses, and video footage from the ultra-wide in particular exhibited less noise around the edges of the frame when shooting with the S24 Ultra. The telephoto probably impressed me the most in both cameras in terms of video improvements over past generations. Stabilization from both is excellent even when shooting zoomed in at 5x at a moderate walking pace. You've still got a pretty usable shot here. Google's secret weapon in video mode is Video Boost, which offloads the processing of video to the cloud so you can take advantage of more heavy-duty stabilization, detail enhancement, and low-light processing. The big new addition to Video Boost in the Pixel 9 Pro is Night Sight for Video, which does exactly what you might expect, crunching numbers in the same way the on-device Night Sight mode works for still shots. The results here are certainly impressive, with more shadow detail preserved in the Night Sight shot, and much less of a jelly effect in this nighttime footage compared to Samsung's camera. The trade-off of course being that because this works in the cloud, you've got to wait for Google servers to work their magic before you get your final footage. And while both support 8K video on paper, Google's is an upscaled 8K mode that you'll need to have processed via Video Boost, which takes extra time, whereas the S24 Ultra's is available right out of the camera. That said, the value of either is definitely debatable in my opinion. So these are easily two of the very best smartphones you can buy right now. For me, the big appeal of the Pixel is the extra software tricks it can offer, mainly to do with photography and videography. The Add Me feature, which we've explored in more detail elsewhere but kind of glossed over in this video, is a really neat addition to combine people into group shots for more memorable moments. And I've already touched on Zoom In-House, which feels special in the same way that Magic Eraser did when I first used it back on the Pixel 6. Yet Samsung does offer an impressive loadout of AI editing features of its own, many of which also run on device. And that's just part of an even more comprehensive loadout of software features that even goes as far as turning the S24 Ultra into a full desktop replacement through DeX. So the decision between these two for me comes down to a choice between my head and my heart. My heart wants to go with the Pixel because of that Pixel software secret sauce that makes it greater than the sum of its parts. But my head says Samsung's internals are superior, will keep up its performance for longer, its screen is still next level fantastic thanks to that Gorilla Armor glass, and it's also matched Google's 7 years of promised Android software updates. Which is why for me, as much as I love the Pixel 9 Pro XL, if you ask me to choose a phone out of this pair to use for the next year or two, my pick would be Samsung's big, heavy, angular beast, the S24 Ultra. But that's just me. Let me know in the comments which you'd pick out of this pair. Stick around and subscribe for more comparisons coming soon, including new iPhones versus both of these phones. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.